Twinema.
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 Twinema. Cinema. Twinema.
Cinema.
Hey gang, just like all the Fast and Furious movies, there's spoilers in this episode.
Hello listeners and welcome to Twinema Cinema. My name is Joey, and as always my twin brother Max is here with me today.
And I couldn't have said it better myself. In fact, it looked like I was saying it myself. It's so bizarre sometimes. We are very similar.
It's striking.
But here we are on Twinema Cinema, which is, of course, the podcast devoted to watching those films that just so happen to have the exact same plot, and they happen to come into being at around the exact same time. Joey, what are we watching today?
Alright, today we are checking out K-9 and Turner&Hooch.
And have you seen any of these?
I have seen Turner&Hooch, but I have not seen K-9.
And I have seen neither of these.
Well,
But
nice.
But if the premise of this podcast is any indicator, I'm thinking they have something in common, and it might just be dogs?
Yes, I believe so. This one, we got dogs and detectives, from my
So
understanding.
they're both cop dogs.
Yes, well, no. Actually, that's not quite the case, but it is kind of the case.
What is the case? Are they on the case?
Yes, well, in Turner&Hooch, they are definitely on the case.
Okay.
I think this is actually our first episode where there is a film that neither of us have seen.
Yeah, none of us have seen K-9, if that's correct.
Yeah, and so that's a first, and I'm excited about that. If you were to take a guess, since I know nothing about K-9 other than, honestly, the cover and that it is starring Jim Belushi.
Yes, the Lesser Belushi.
Yes, the Lesser Belushi and a dog, which I believe is a German Shepherd. And then Turner&Hooch is starring the great Tom Hanks and a dog.
It's like, and we're clear at this point that they're not the same dog.
Yes, two different dogs, played
Okay.
by two different dog actors.
Okay. Like, I know a lot of actors cover a lot of ground, and I know it might be a popular dog, so I wanted to make sure.
Yes, they are two different dogs, and if they aren't, it was one hell of a performance. So if you were to take a guess, a wild stab in the dark, what would you say Turner&Hooch is about, and what would you say K-9 is about?
Well, for both of them, I'm going to guess that they have a similar plot structure, probably involving a police detective that is, by the book, serious, and they just cannot crack a crime, like probably a crime wave that's going through the city, and they have to get a partner that is, proficient in street smarts. So we have one of the dogs in either one of these movies probably witnessing the crime. They know who the perpetrator is, or they're really good at smelling drugs or something like that. So they have to team up together, the dog and detective, to try to take down the bad guys.
That seems pretty close. I'm going to say that from my understanding and remembrance of Turner&Hooch, you're pretty close on a lot of those details, and I can't imagine K-9 is that much different. Like, realistically, it seems like it's just a buddy cop film with a dog and a police officer instead of another police officer.
I know, they couldn't afford it, so they just got the dog. It's probably cheaper. They work for Kibbles and Bits.
Yes, I'm sure that is all that is required.
And that sound you heard was Joey's palm going through the front of his face.
I mean, it just... Are dog actors SAG?
They are wag.
God damn it.
I can't help myself.
Okay. That's something I'll have to look up after the fact and just find out on my own since you're not of any help. But yeah, I don't know what else we want to talk about regarding K-9 since we both have no idea what that movie's about. All I know about it is that Jim Belushi is in it, and I know the cover. That is really the only thing I know about the movie.
And then I'm presuming the dogs get a badge at some point, on the covers at least. And they just make the detectives' lives living hell. They destroy their property, probably drool on everything. And I'd have to guess probably get a lot more respect in the department than either detective does.
That's probably a good point. Is it just me, or am I just remembering this incorrectly, or in the 90s, was there, like, a wave of dog films? Because, like, I'm suddenly remembering that there's, like, an entire franchise of the Beethoven films, and I think Air Bud was in the 90s, or at least began in the 90s.
I think it was, like, late 90s, but you are right. Dog films definitely made a mild comeback.
My Dog Skip? Remember that one?
My Dog Skip was
There was
in
a whole
there
TV
as
show with Wishbone?
Well, there was also, buddy cop movies where there wasn't two cops. There was just a cop and a blank. So if it wasn't a dog, it was a kid or some kind of amusing sidekick. It was an oddball pairing, but of course they learned to love each other.
I mean, isn't that Clint Eastwood movie too with an orangutan?
I think that might have been in the 80s, but the concept is still there.
Gotcha. Forefather, that Clint Eastwood fella.
I know, they made 2 of those.
Oh, God. Is there a K-9 too? Is there a Turner&Hooch too?
Yes.
If not, should we make one of them?
Well, I think... Is there a K-10?
God. So, I'm back.
He had to take a breather there.
Yeah, unless there's anything else you can think of to talk about, I think we just have to get straight into the movies again on this one.
I cannot think of a thing. We need to dig right into this one like so many backyards.
Wonderful.
I know that you physically can't take us out for a cup of coffee, but you could always buy us one.
And through coffee.com, that is ko-fi.com/Twinema Cinema, you can do just that. You can donate just a few dollars to keep the lights on for the podcast, and you can write reviews at the same time. Let us know that you enjoy the podcast, and we'd be forever appreciated. So if you feel like tossing us a couple shekels, that's coffee.com/Twinema Cinema, ko-fi. It's all about those cappuccinos.
Max, go for something more expensive.
I need that vanilla soybean latte with almond milk, and I gotta have a venti.
Exactly. And mine will be a Frappuccino with extra shots.
And that's to go.
Scott Turner had finally found the girl of his dreams when something big happened to change it. Something called Hooch.
Wait, whoa! No!
This is Mike Dooley.
Are you even paying attention to me?
And his new partner, Officer Lewis.
This is a highly trained, vicious police dog.
Don't need the car! Not the car! Oh, no! What have you done?
I can't believe all that came out of one animal.
I don't have room for a dog like Hooch.
I need a real dog. Benji.
He'll take care of your house. You're lucky to have him.
Well, let's get one thing straight. The woman is mine.
Oh, that's it! I'm getting my gun!
Don't you ever pull anything like that again.
They're the 2 toughest cops in town.
Oh, no!
One's just a little smarter than the other.
Touchstone Pictures presents Tom Hanks,
James Belushi
Turner, and Hooch.
in K-9.
And we're back.
Yes, we're certainly back, and the fur certainly flew.
Well, I guess there was a decent amount of fur flying. Now that I think about it, it did happen.
Oh, there had to have been fur everywhere on those sets.
I didn't actually think about that point, that it would cause extra cleanup, but you are correct, sir.
Yeah, with all the damage those dogs were doing, I have to imagine fur was at least a portion of it.
Yeah, and you can't forget that Jim Belushi was probably pretty messy, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, there's the mess that Jim Belushi made, and then there's the mess the dog made. And I have to imagine...
And then Tom Hanks probably cleaned up both sets.
Yeah. Because they were... Well, I mean, it's entirely possible they filmed relatively close to each other because they're both set in Southern California.
I hope both of the dogs got to meet at some point. Like, that would be really... I want that photo. 2 stars on the red carpet, but it's those 2 dogs.
You can imagine at some point in a dog park somewhere that you imagine they just saw each other and went, "You!
How dare you!"
Except they all talk like Scooby. How dare you!
The dog actors in these 2 films were great. I think one of them for Hooch was Beasley the dog, and then I think the name of the dog for the dog in K-9 playing Jerry Lee was Rando the dog.
The amazing Rando. Yeah, I was actually satisfied with the performances of the animals. The humans, sometimes not so much.
I thought the dog performers were quite impressive in a number of scenes. which was really interesting because I've been watching a decent amount of animal movies lately. And so watching dog performers or animal performers, it's kind of just like I'm focused on it now. Like, how did they get them to do that? But there's this cool fact I found out about Rando. I believe this was that dog's only movie, and they were born in West Germany, and they spoke German. So they had to, when they came to the United States, they had to be retrained in English for the movie.
Wait, so he was an actual German Shepherd?
Yes. It's amazing. They auditioned like 40 plus dogs, and none of the American German Shepherds were quite cutting it, and so they cast an actual German Shepherd.
That is fun.
But I think as far as like the human performances were concerned, I definitely have. Some people did do some excellent jobs, but I think overall the movies lean so heavily on the performance between the dog and their cop partner that it all depends on how that interaction went, and that's kind of what carries the whole movie. Because that's about 80% of both of these movies, even more, depending. But that if those scenes don't go well, it just doesn't work. And for me, it seemed like Turner and Hooch had a little better of a bond for me than Jerry Lee and Jim Belushi. What were your thoughts? Who did you like?
I'm pretty much along those lines as well. It seemed like Tom Hanks actually bonded with the animals and learned to love them, where it seemed like Jim Belushi was mildly inconvenienced. It kind of stayed along those lines the further we went in. When we actually got to Jerry Lee's death, and I'm doing the finger quotes thing, I really didn't buy that he actually was remorseful or anything like that, like he actually missed his partner.
Well, I would say comparatively, that is definitely a factor. I mean, Tom Hanks is like a God-level actor, so I think that is certainly a factor. But there is one moment in K-9 with Jim Belushi, like when he is crying to his girlfriend in the ER regarding Jerry Lee being shot. I really did like that moment because it did expand his character and show more of his love for Jerry Lee. Because really, I think one of the things is that we just don't see as much of a character arc in Jim Belushi's character in, what is it, Officer Dooley? Detective Dooley, I think? Is that his name?
Officer Detective Dooley.
Yes, one of those two. But yeah, he doesn't have that much of a character arc. Whereas Hooch in Turner and Hooch really does change so much about Turner's life that it only makes sense that they would have bonded more. Whereas Jerry Lee and Jim Belushi just don't. The story isn't written for them to have that much of a character change. They don't change that much. It's just like, oh, I think I have a partner now that I actually like.
Now I can just continue being half-ass cop. But yeah, aside from their differing policing styles, there actually was a remarkable amount similar with this movie. I mentioned the same Southern California location, San Diego for K-9, and a fictional town probably north of San Diego for Turner and Hooch.
Yeah, it was actually, it was called Cypress Beach. I tried to look it up and see if it existed. It does not, but it's like it's supposed to be like a NorCal beach town kind of thing. So somewhere between like Los Angeles and San Francisco.
Is that NorCal? I thought that would still be SoCal. Mid-Cal.
California is really tall, so...
The state is very tall.
Mid-Cal sounds right. Like a Mid-Cal beach town. Sounds good.
Like mid to low-Cal.
But California locations, certainly. Both with police officers who end up working with a dog to solve a specific crime. In K-9, it actually is a K-9 police officer, and in Turner and Hooch, it is actually a witness. A witness to the crime is his partner, Hooch. So he doesn't technically have a partner in that one, but essentially it's almost the exact same scenario. They're with each other throughout both films trying to solve a crime.
In which case, they also have similar elements as far as a dog buddy movie goes. They emphasize the horrible diets the dogs are on to kind of call them out as wild cards. Hooch drinks beer and Jerry Lee eats chili.
Well, Hooch also eats cookies, I think. That was one thing. Cookies and chocolate chips.
We also have a doggy bath montage, in which case they try to clean the beasts.
In K-9, it's Jim Belushi running Jerry Lee through a car wash in his convertible because he can't seem to interact with him in any other way. And in Turner&Hooch, it's just a regular bath. But both times, there's a lot of hijinks. You know, when you have a dog partner, hijinks ensue. And I think just the physical comedy of Tom Hanks in Turner&Hooch really sells a lot of these scenes. Without that, I don't think it would work nearly as well. But he, in his younger days, is just hilarious.
And yeah, I guess another similarity is they're trying to emphasize, I don't know, I wouldn't say beefcakeness, but cuteness, we'll say, because both of the main actors in these movies appear in their underwear. Although it is definitely a battle of boxers versus briefs. As Jim Belushi appears in boxers and Tom Hanks appears in, I have to assume, are designer briefs.
Yeah, but, you see a lot of Hanks in this one.
There's a lot of Hanks.
It cracked me up. There's like early on in the movie, there's like a profile shot where you're just like, that's a little bit more Hanks than I was expecting to see in the first 10 minutes of this movie.
It's like, I'm not exactly saying it's undesirable, but I just was not expecting it. Whereas after watching Turner&Hooch first and then watching K-9, I was absolutely expecting it. And then it's like, no, put that away. Put that away, Jim.
Well, that's good. We both watched them in an opposite order, which isn't like anything different for us at this point. It seems like we are the same, but slightly different.
Which it was pretty much how these movies are as well. So
exactly, there are so many similarities. Like another one that just really stood out to me so specifically is each of these films uses an iconic 70s film score and moment to score the dog doing something specific. So in K-9, they use the Jaws theme to reenact a moment in Jaws where he's crawling through some sheets as if a shark sneaking up on the couple. And in Turner&Hooch, they use the theme from 2001, A Space Odyssey, as Hooch is attacking Hanks when they first run into each other. And like as it was happening during Turner&Hooch, I just my mind went, really? Like it's going to be this specific of a connection? I mean, I'm glad it wasn't both the same theme, but just the fact that they both use that a 70s film score in that regard really caught me off guard. It's similar but different.
Well, I imagine it was a little more of a cultural touchstone at the time anyway, because 1989 was closer to the 70s than we are now to 1989. So
I mean, that makes a good sense for sure. It's weird, because you and I watch so many different movies from so many different decades that it's just we forget about that. Sometimes you forget about the context of the era. And that's one thing I definitely noticed in both these movies in terms of the score.
Well, in terms of the score, it wasn't that fantastic. There was also that time when I guess they were graduating to synths before they finally fixed up their acts towards the mid-90s. Exactly.
Both of these films had fairly cheesy scores that I didn't really enjoy for a lot of it, but it was effective enough. It just reminded me the fact that both of them had a similar tone to them in their score. I was just okay, this is just what they did in the 80s. I can't be mad about it because it's what everyone was doing.
I mean, yeah, it worked, and I imagine it was cheaper than hiring an entire orchestra.
I mean, that's a pretty good point. For me, one thing that really stood out in this movie, it was a moment that both movies had. And it was just, it was kind of to be expected, really, because a lot of buddy cop films end up having one of their partners, usually the new guy, sacrificing themselves for the old grizzled detective. And in both of these movies, that definitely happens. In Turner&Hooch, Hooch gets shot protecting Tom Hanks. And in K-9, Jerry Lee also gets shot. In this situation, not exactly protecting Jim Belushi, but chasing down a bad guy. And if Jim Belushi would have tried to do that instead of Jerry Lee, he would have gotten shot. Like, the scenario plays out where both dogs get shot protecting or working the case. And then following that, both police officers rush them to the hospitals, one a vet in Turner&Hooch and one a regular hospital in K-9, which I think that scene works out a lot better because just the idea of you bringing a dog to a regular hospital, even though it is in fact a police officer, it just is a nice touch. I think that worked really well, making that scene even a little more heightened. But they both rush them to the hospitals, and in doing so, they completely forget about and just gloss over the fact that multiple people were murdered in the scene previously. Like,
well, they completely forget to wrap up their crimes.
Exactly. Like they just cut away from that scene and just say, to hell with it, we are going to save our partners. Which makes sense, if an officer on duty is shot, you got to take care of that. But they just leave these people there, and there's no wrap up in any way. Like, even after that, they never address it. It just gets completely glossed over, and they move on. And I thought that was, a little strange.
A little bit, especially in K-9 when so much collateral damage was accrued, especially when you seemingly have Jim Belushi shooting his entire clip at the bad guy, and then the bad guy also getting gunned down by the people in the deal that didn't go through correctly. Although that depends on which cut of the film you're watching.
Exactly.
As apparently they decided to show a scene where the drug dealers in the helicopter are also gunning down the bad guy in K-9 to make it look like Jim Belushi isn't a straight-up murderer.
Well, yes. But at the same time, he did shoot a police officer and try to run. So I understand shooting him in that context isn't exactly straight-up murder, but he would have shot him in the back, and, that kind of isn't a particularly good view for anyone, especially a police officer involved shooting situation. But in the version that I watched on Amazon Prime, it seems like they took both of those alternate endings and cut them into one.
I got that impression as well.
Yeah, it feels like maybe for the home video release, they took each of those endings that they tested, and they're like, neither of them works that well, so let's just have it meet somewhere in the middle. Because I was a little confused as to what happened, but I think that makes the most sense. And then one last similarity that I got to throw in there is that in both of these movies, there is a soon-to-be iconic TV star who plays their superior officer. In K-9, it's Ed O'Neill from Married with Children. His show was on concurrently, but obviously hadn't quite hit the peak of its fame until kind of when this movie came out and a little after. And then in Turner&Hooch, it's Craig T. Nelson.
And that frustrated me to no end because my stupid brain keeps confusing those actors constantly.
Really? Ed O'Neill and Craig T. Nelson?
Yeah, especially with their reemergence in the early 2010s in various shows. I don't know why. I never could tell them apart. And so much so that in my notes, I was like, no way Craig T. Nelson is not the bad guy. And when he was, they said, bad coach. And like, wait, was he coach or was that Ed O'Neill? Son of a bitch. And then I was vindicated, though, because I got it right.
He was indeed coach. Although both of those TV actors in their respective shows did play football. So it's like, not unbelievable.
But I was like, oh no. Of course Ed O'Neill is in K-9. He would have to be. To balance out the Craig T.
Yeah, and Ed O'Neill is a much, much smaller role. Obviously, Craig T. Nelson being the villain and being an integral part of kind of the whole movie, just part of the background. Ed O'Neill is really in the sequence in the movie only to introduce Jerry Lee, which is a pretty good moment. I enjoyed that. Like, there's a lot of good moments in each of these movies.
As a whole, maybe not so much, but they definitely have their moments.
So, Max, what for you in either of these films specifically didn't work?
Well, K-9, I found a few more items that didn't quite work. Mostly it was the pairing with the policeman and the dog. What worked so well in Turner&Hooch was Tom Hanks' character was just fussy and a little bit OCD. And that was thrown into chaos because of Hooch, who is just, chaos incarnate. Whereas Jim Belushi was already a loose cannon cop, and to have a dog that is also a loose cannon cop doesn't really add much as far as conflict is concerned. It's just two loose cannon cops who can't control either one of them.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Like, Jerry Lee really is, in so many ways, the perfect partner for Jim Belushi, for Officer Dooley, because they are so much the same. So they're going to do things in a similar manner. Like, it really is showcased perfectly in the bar fight scene, where Jerry Lee busts in as a rogue cop and just starts kicking ass. And, like, I realized that I enjoyed K-9 a lot. Like, there are moments in the movie that there is just, it is gold. Like, and so much of it has to do with just the situations that they put themselves in, but it's just really hard for me to believe a lot of it. Like, it's like, I think the setup in these scenes is so much better than the follow-through. I think that's what it comes down to. Is it's like, okay, that's a great scenario, but the execution just isn't quite there. I think that might partially be due to what you're saying, is there's just like, there isn't quite as much of a connection or a change in these characters. Also, it just kind of feels like Jerry Lee's out acting Jim Belushi in a lot of these scenes, where I think it's more even party in Turner&Hooch.
Although I was kind of expecting that one, because it doesn't take much to outact Jim Belushi.
Poor guy. We are really shitting on him pretty badly. And I think I've only seen like maybe 2 movies that he's in. I think this one and Curly Sue. And then there was that TV show, According to Jim. But I don't really know him from much else other than that. But, you know, I've seen so many Tom Hanks movies.
Yeah, I think mostly the problem everyone has with Jim Belushi is he's not John.
Living in that shadow has got to be really hard, you know? Especially when you're both comedians. You know, if Jim Belushi was trying to not be a comedic actor, it might not be as big of an issue. But when you're running in that same territory, it's hard to not make the comparison.
Yeah, and I feel kind of bad for him, too. It's like, oh, no, I'm not the comedian that died of a drug overdose. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate situation for sure. For me, I'm trying to think of things that didn't work in either film, and really, most of it does. Both of them are enjoyable movies with a lot of comedic moments. It's just, I feel like one of them's a little bit more lovable, and I think that's Turner&Hooch, and it has a lot to do with Tom Hanks and just his change in character over time. Also, for me, with Turner&Hooch, like, there's a love story in there. And, like, when you have, like, a love story, I'm a sucker for that kind of romantic stuff. So it just...
say an emerging love story.
Yes, I mean, in Turner&Hooch, it's like, you've got the meet cute, and you got to go all the way through it. Whereas in K-9, it's an existing relationship, and that's just, in so many ways, it's a little less exciting when you show it cinematically. It's important, and it's actually pretty cool that they decided to have that as part of the story instead of having a meet cute go alongside it, instead of having to have a romance go alongside it. So I appreciated that. It doesn't quite connect me as much to the film.
In which case, they could have easily made that a little more important in the movie with the relationship already existing. Introduction of Jerry Lee in the Dooley's life would have definitely caused more stress on the relationship, but she just kind of rolled with it, which is good for her, but I feel like that could have been a little more important in the movie.
Yeah, it like, he was more concerned about it than it actually was, which, like, what it shows in the movie is that their relationship is actually really strong, and I think the fact that their relationship is so strong just makes there inherently be less conflict, which in so many ways makes it a little less interesting when you show it in a movie.
Whereas Turner&Hooch definitely emphasizes the chaos in his life, maybe not his relationship so much, but it's definitely a little more internal.
Well, one thing that I did have a problem with in K-9 is the fact that Jerry Lee is like a super cop. Like, Jerry Lee is doing things that are almost impossible for a dog to accomplish. Like, not quite impossible in all scenes, but, like, pretty darn close. So it's
like,
one
he
of those...
bit a cue ball in half. That's pretty damn impossible.
Well, not even that. He caught it. I've seen dogs not be able to catch a tennis ball thrown at him slowly. Having a man throw a cue ball at a dog from like 12 feet away with full arm strength, and you catch it and then you bite it in half. Like, it was a pretty great moment to show the badassery of Jerry Lee, but I was just like, that's not possible. We are now in the realm of impossible.
Like, I was half expecting them to really do the good cop, bad cop. It's like, call him off. I don't know how.
They kind of did that. They leaned into it a little bit, but they didn't go fully into it, and I think that is one of the problems with it as well. But really, it's so strange, because some of the moments that they have, some of the interactions, really are what solidify the movie. Like, near the end in K-9, where Jerry Lee is recovering from his injuries, he's pretending to not hear him give that sympathetic speech. And that's just a moment that happens in all kinds of TV shows and all kinds of movies, but it works so well with a dog doing that. It's just like a kid pretending to be asleep when their parent is coming in to tuck them in at night and tells them all these wonderful things. It's just that kind of a very genuine, believable moment, and it works so well because of the dog performance. And I found out through IMDb, I'm not 100% sure if this is true because I couldn't verify it anywhere else, but apparently Jerry Lee was actually doing that. It wasn't part of the script. He was just pretending to not hear him. And if that's the case, this is perhaps the best dog actor I have ever seen.
There's one thing in particular that always just kind of bugs me. It's not so much a problem with the movie itself, but it's just the style at which Jim Belushi operates as a police officer. He's the loose cannon, and my favorite part of the movie is actually when he drives a convertible he just rented from Budget across the street through a house to break up a drug bust.
That was a pretty great moment, for sure.
It was a great moment, but horrible cop. Like, I cannot, my brain just kind of chips in. It's like, there's no way he would not be reprimanded for that and continued to operate.
Well, for sure. And that's actually a problem that I have with a lot of movies. And even in Turner&Hooch, they do a little bit of road cop action, but not quite to the extreme of what K-9 does. And it bugs me in every movie now. It didn't bug me when I was a kid, but now looking at it, it's like these police officers are rolling over a lot of rules, and in some cases, a lot of people's rights. Like it's problematic to showcase that in good cops, and unfortunately, it does happen in both of these movies.
And just as far as the crime in the movie getting wrapped up for K-9, he accrues so much damage and musters up so much ill will within his own department. I cannot imagine him getting away with anything, especially going off to Las Vegas at the end of the movie. I would have to assume he was fired.
Well, I think that's a fair assumption, and I don't know if that's the case, but apparently there's sequels to this movie that I didn't know existed, and at least one of them, they're private investigators. So maybe they did get fired at the end of this movie and just went to Vegas because
the lady dog, no less, that I have to assume they stole.
Well, I feel like maybe it's a different poodle, and because this poodle's got blue ribbons, so I think it might not be the same dog, but we're led to believe it's the same dog.
So they abducted a different dog, you're saying?
That was another pretty good scene in the movie, really.
Yeah, that was another similarity I wanted to bring up, the doggy love scenes.
Yeah, both scenes end up having dog love and dog sex, obviously. It is more explicit in K-9 and definitely behind the scenes in Turner&Hooch, but it does lead to the meet cute in Turner&Hooch, so it works really well. That's a difference as well, is that K-9 is a PG-13 film, whereas Turner&Hooch is PG.
Which is weird because they seem to get away with a lot more in Turner&Hooch despite the PG rating. I mean, they killed the dog at the end, for God's sake.
Yeah, which also I found out, that's a huge difference between the two films, is that Jerry Lee survives in K-9 and Hooch dies in Turner&Hooch. But they did shoot two different endings, where Hooch lives. And, nice. But they shot two different endings, one where he lives and one where he dies. And apparently, according to IMDb again, the audiences tested them almost exactly the same, but there was more of an emotional reaction when he did die. So that's the ending that Jeffrey Katzenberg decided to do.
And I honestly don't hate it. as far as endings are concerned, I was impressed with the ballsiness of it, so I didn't really have an issue with that. Both endings kind of acquitted themselves nicely. Turner&Hooch, you have the puppy, so Hooch lives on, and his offspring, and Jerry Lee survives, and he gives a great performance while James Belushi is unloading his guilt. So that both worked out okay for me. As far as those were concerned.
Yeah, both endings worked. Obviously one is significantly more sad, and Tom Hanks is on the record saying that Turner and Hooch would have made more money if Hooch would have survived. So I don't doubt that when you look at just how long those movies play out. It is sad, and then that word of mouth kind of hurts people. But then at the same time, there's a movie like Marley and Me that has a dog dying as like the main point and made unbelievable amounts of money. So
to me, it was kind of counterintuitive to think that a cop buddy dog movie would be rated PG-13, because the whole idea of a dog movie to me signifies trying to get kids to watch the movie. So making it PG-13 seemed counterintuitive, whereas the PG one, which is a little more silly in my opinion, definitely went the more adult route. So it was a weird juxtaposition there.
Well, I mean, that's what happens when you have Steven Seagal writing the movie. I mean, if he would have starred in it instead of Jim Belushi, then it would have been fine. We've had a lot more martial arts moments. I don't know if it would have been much better, but we would have at least had some kick-ass, gun taking away, kicking people in the chest kind of interaction.
I think you misread Siegel and Seagal, Joey, but it certainly is a wonderful world you live in.
You're saying Steven Seagal didn't write K-9? I mean, that makes more sense. But, like, right when I saw it in the opening credits, I was like, holy shit, he wrote this movie?
I'm sorry you went in with that assumption.
Well, you know, sometimes your dreams just don't come true. That's just how it is.
But speaking of writing with these movies, they both got heavy paydays on the spec market, which is very interesting, as Turner&Hooch existed first and was bought by Disney and Touchstone for $1 million.
Dang.
Which
that's some serious cash.
Crazy. But right after that, it went into development hell and almost fell apart until K-9's script was purchased for a 6-figure sum. And apparently the authors of that went around what they call the water bottle tour of Hollywood, just talking and taking at meetings before the final sale. And apparently their meeting with Disney ended with them saying that they almost got sued by Disney because of Turner&Hooch, which was in development hell, but it was obviously very similar. But because K-9 was purchased, Turner&Hooch was resurrected, inciting this duel, because they both went into production around the same time, although K-9 went into production first.
Yeah, I mean, I heard a lot of different things about Turner&Hooch. Like, a number of different people were auditioned and were almost cast as Turner. And there even was a director change 2 weeks into production.
The Fonz, Henry Winkler, was going to direct, but apparently he clashed with Tom Hanks. He was notoriously quoted saying he got along better with Hooch than Turner.
Which, like, is so amazing and weird all at the same time, because both Henry Winkler and Tom Hanks are considered two of the nicest people in Hollywood. So I want to know what happened. Like, did somebody just eat somebody else's lunch? Like, what could have possibly gone on that caused two of the nicest people to not get along?
I'm speculating here. I almost think it isn't too much with them two being at odds. As we've learned before, Jeffrey Katzenberg often throws a wrench into the works in a lot of ways with his movies, especially with his tenure at Disney. So I have a feeling it was more of a conflict with him than anything else.
I mean, that makes sense. Like, what I saw is it was listed that Jeffrey Katzenberg stepped in and did have him removed. So if that is the case, you know, that seems more believable. Or at least it helps keep my Hollywood dreams alive, that there are good people out there and that they can perhaps get along.
There's always problems. I mean, you and me have had our issues at times, but we're brothers, so we have to love each other.
One of the most depressing ones is, like, Harold Ramis and Bill Murray fought so much on Groundhog Day that they didn't really talk ever after that. And that just, like, It happens. Let's not be like that, Max. Let's stay together.
We might be apart right now, but we'll be back at some point, when quarantine ends.
True. We are recording this in different locations, but it's not because I don't love you. It's because I don't want to die.
Yes, that.
So since we already started talking about some of the history behind each of these films, let's get into some more specifics, Max.
As always with these types of movies, it seems the box office gross is extraordinarily close. K-9 beat Disney to the punch once more, as is tradition, it seems. It came out in end of April of 1989, and it domestically grossed $43 million in its run, with 35 international, for a total of just above $78 million. Turner&Hooch got that nice July release in 89 and ended up with a total of about $71 million.
Okay, so K-9 came out on top.
K-9 was the top dog as far as money is concerned, and both budgets were under $15 million. So, yeah, they weren't exactly expensive to make, so they were hits. Although the main difference as far as legacy is concerned is the critical reception. Turner&Hooch got 52%. On Rotten Tomatoes, whereas K-9 got 22% critically on Rotten Tomatoes. So kind of, Whereas it's almost the opposite on Metacritic, 44 out of 100 for K-9, 36 out of 100 for Turner&Hooch on Metacritic. So, there's definitely a divide as far as thinking of the quality of these movies.
I'm honestly surprised K-9 is that low, but I do think it might be, so far in the podcast, one of the lesser movies that I've seen for our podcast. But to have it flip with Turner&Hooch on Metacritic is a surprise. But also at the same time, K-9 isn't like a objectively bad movie. It's just like it doesn't quite hit on all. It's not firing on all cylinders. The premise is good enough. It's fun enough. But it just doesn't quite hit that next level where it's like, this is a movie I would definitely rewatch. Whereas Turner&Hooch, I've seen it a couple times because I just enjoy that interplay.
And that definitely is a testament to the performance of the dog in there. I think the eyes in particular just make it have that certain human quality where you absolutely empathize with Hooch, whereas Jerry Lee, he's a dog the entire time. I never thought of him as a person, so to speak,
I think that has a lot to do both with the dog performance and with, like we were saying earlier, the human interaction. I think that if Jim Belushi would have had more of a connection with Jerry Lee and just had like a little bit more of that, we would see him more in that way. Because honestly, there's some amazing moments where Jerry Lee does like some eye twitches and things where I'm just like, how did they get the dog to do that? Did they shoot it like 20 times and just hope that he would do that in that exact moment? But I think a lot of it just comes down to the performances, is how they played together really makes or breaks the movie.
It's definitely their utilization that affects how we feel about them too. I feel like Turner&Hooch organically, or at least story-wise, used Hooch much better, as he's a witness to the crime, so he has to help Tom Hanks, whereas I guess Jerry Lee is already a police dog, so Jim Belushi just goes in and it's like, hey, I need this dog to help me solve the crime. There's no real connection to the story there.
It's kind of more of like a generic story in that regard.
It also helps in Turner&Hooch that he already knows Hooch, so he already has a relationship with the dog.
Like that's actually a really good point. I didn't even think of that. That seeding of those first interactions with him, it does make a big difference. He already hates this dog. For him to end up loving this dog at the end is a massive change.
I also found it funny that both cops in the movie threaten to shoot the dog, and the dogs both get shot, but not by them.
Yeah, Tom Hanks actually pulls a gun on him, which is it went pretty far with him, which I didn't expect. I was like, holy crap! I forgot that he actually goes through it. And it's not like he had a gun laying out in the open either. He had to get it out of his closet, unlock his gun safe, load the gun, and then threaten the dog with the gun. He went through all the stages. this is one of those reasons why, like, maybe you shouldn't have a gun loose in the home, because I think the only reason he didn't shoot the dog is because it was locked up in a safe in his bedroom.
Yeah, if it was readily available, Hooch would have died earlier.
And then we wouldn't have the movie that I happen to love.
Can't say that I love either of these movies in particular. I mean, even Tom Hanks at, I think, a particular dinner in his honor was surprised to see footage from Turner and Hooch in his highlight reel.
Even if the movie itself isn't that beloved, you can't deny, like, some of the moments in the movie. Like, there's some history behind part of it. Like, him yelling at the dog about him eating the car is used in test footage for Toy Story. And so they used the audio of that scene to showcase Woody's emotions and reactions. So if Turner and Hooch doesn't exist, there's a decent chance that Tom Hanks isn't convinced that he's going to be great as Woody in Toy Story. So, like, Turner and Hooch's legacy is strangely more important than the film itself. Like, it really has this reach because of that alone. And also, for me, I think buddy cop films are perhaps my favorite genre of film, so really, it's hard for me to not like these kinds of movies. And, you know, it fits a niche for me. It fits a need where I love it. And also, like, they're both obviously very, very cheesy. And I think neither of them gets elevated beyond that. So I think that's part of why, like, they're not going to have a super lasting legacy in a lot of ways, because it is what it is, and it's not trying to be much more.
Although their legacies continue on regardless anyway, because they were so inexpensive to produce, they both continued on. K-9 got 2 direct-to-video sequels, although like 10 years later, which is kind of weird. And Turner&Hooch is getting a Disney Plus reboot with Josh Peck in the Tom Hanks role. And both had failed TV series being produced from them. In fact, the Turner&Hooch one was going to star Thomas F. Wilson, famous for playing Biff in Back to the Future.
He's a very nice guy, from what I understand. So seeing him in a role like that, where you don't hate him, might have been a good thing. Like, I would have liked to have seen that.
In fact, you can, and we will be posting the link on our Facebook page when the episode drops. So if you actually want to watch that full produced pilot for Turner&Hooch, we can provide that.
I haven't. It's easy to find. Like, we can watch it. I haven't seen it.
I have a link. We can watch the whole thing.
Well, I'm gonna have to check that out, because worst case scenario, I waste half an hour.
Like, it's in my notes, if anything, but yeah, it's not very good quality. Obviously, I think this was smuggled onto the internet, but it's I thumbed through it, and it's the same dog. So we've come down to it, the end of another episode, and the question has to be asked, who was top dog?
Well, for me, it's pretty obviously Turner and Hooch. And I think just listening to our discussion throughout most of these episodes, and this one too, you kind of realize which one we're leaning towards pretty early on. Like, I want to try to be unbiased, but you can't when you really like something.
Whereas this is probably the most balanced I've been, since I hadn't seen either of these movies beforehand. But I'm going to agree with you anyway, surprise, surprise, as I think that Turner&Hooch was just the better written, better acted, and better remembered of either of these movies. Whereas I enjoy the wanton destruction that Jim Belushi brings to K-9, and just the intimidation factor that Jerry Lee provides as his dog partner. I enjoyed that quite a bit, but there's no beating the big blue eyes of Beasley with Tom Hanks in Turner&Hooch.
For this one, I think a lot of it comes down to the humor that comes out. For me, Tom Hanks gets debased through a lot of this. There's a lot of moments that really are taking him down a notch. And because he was such a pompous ass in the beginning of the movie, that is a pretty enjoyable thing to watch, to see this dog kind of take his life apart and flip it upside down. I mean, the moment where he's smashing his face against a door because the dog ran through a doggy door, it's great. It's absolutely worth it to watch Tom Hanks smash his face against the door 3 times in a row. It's just, those kinds of moments are a lot of fun, and I just don't see quite as much of that in K-9. He is affecting his life, and he is making it a little bit more difficult, but he's not changing him. And I think that's the main reason for me why Turner and Hooch is a film that I will probably watch again.
Yeah, and he's actually changed, although I would have loved to be the PA on the other side of that stick on the doggy door and just pull Tom Hanks into the door repeatedly. It's like that would have been the highlight of my life.
That would have been pretty fantastic. I also would have liked to have been there to see Tom Hanks eat a doggy biscuit live. Like, that would have been pretty cool.
And it just comes down to change as part of the characters. Tom Hanks had it. James Belushi did not. He's still a smug asshole at the end as he was at the start.
This is just for you and me. Do you want me to correct you because you said James Belushi?
His name is James.
Well, never mind then. I am, because it's James, Jim for short. Yeah, my bad. Don't worry about it. Yeah, so in this movie duel, it seems that Turner and Hooch has come out on top by a slight margin in the case of Max, and a bit of a larger margin in the case of Joe.
Although I think most of Tom Hanks's problems would have been solved if he just bought PF Flyers at the beginning, because he could have just outrun Hooch the whole time. That's a Sandlot joke for those who don't get it.
And if you don't get it, get out. No, please keep listening. I would like you to listen, even if you haven't seen The Sandlot. But you should probably watch The Sandlot, because I love that movie. Is The Sandlot dueling with anything? Can we watch it for the show?
It isn't dueling anything, although it's one of those weird movies on Rotten Tomatoes that is barely rotten. It's like 56%. It's like, no way in hell is this a bad movie.
I mean, I guess movies marketed for kids kind of can go either way when adults are the ones reviewing them.
Yeah, that and, when you have so many jokes that revolve around dog drool, it's like, come on, that's going to be memorable.
And thus ends another one of our episodes of Twinema.
As always, please like and subscribe on Apple iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. He's Joey.
He is Max.
And we thank you for listening once more. And we'll see you next time.
Also, continue to wash your hands. It's important.
Yep, it is very, very important.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Twinema Cinema. Please like, share, and subscribe on your favorite podcatching devices. Also, we want to hear what you think. What other dueling movies should we look into? And what did you think of this week's episode? Let us know, and be sure to come back next time where we'll be
watching Who Really Has the Magic Touch.
And thanks for stopping by.